This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, a spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver a highly effective, customized, and engaging learning experience for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the eLearn podcast. My name is Ladek, as you just heard there in the introduction, but I am super excited here to introduce my two guests that I have with me, Brooke Barrett and Michaela Kingsley. You are both working with about a company called Bench K-12, which is conquering a problem. I got to be honest, when it came through my email inbox, I got to say, this was probably 6 months ago that I got the first email around this. It's funny how long it takes to put put these conversations together. I didn't know this was a problem. And that's just like the total honest answer. I have 3 kids, 2 of whom are still in the elementary school system universe, that one's in the secondary school system universe. But I'm really excited to talk about it because it's about talent management. And I know that Bench K-12 has a larger vision, but this is about talent management. This is about teacher management. This is about solving a human resources issue or a talent issue in this space that I don't think many people know exists. And so I'm really excited to talk about it today. But before we do that, I would love for both of you to please take a time to introduce yourselves. Why don't we start with you, Brooke? Tell us, rather than me butchering your bio and tell us about who you are, your background, and how Bench K-12 this thing got started.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us today. It's really great to see everybody. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Brooke Barrett, and I am the founding partner and president of Bench K-12, and we call ourselves the future of work for K-12 educators. And we actually talk about it as talent empowerment rather than management. So we're really thinking about how do we help educators really own their careers and have the kind of careers that they want and feel supported and sustained in their jobs so that we can solve the talent shortage.
Fantastic. Michaela, I'm going to give you the stage real quick. Tell us about who you are.
Great. Thanks for having me. So my name is Michaela, and I am an occasional substitute teacher. So I'm here to add some real lived experience stories to the table today. I work full time, but I have some nice time off that I can take occasionally to fill in when the schools are experiencing staffing shortages. I have a kid in the 8th grade and a kid in the 11th grade, both in public schools. And when their schools were closing during the pandemic, I really wanted to step up and help. So we'll talk about that later. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So this is, I guess, anybody who's out there, we know about the tech shortage. We know about tech worker shortage. Tell me about how deep the teacher shortage universe is. Like, why is this such a significant problem?
Sure. So the talent shortage, and I would say not even just talent shortage, but retention issue that we have in K-12 education has been building for some time now and has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. So when I started in the classroom 20 years ago, I'm dating myself right now, but when I started in the classroom 20 years ago, there was actually a shortage. We actually had a hiring freeze in LA Unified, which was where I was contracted to work or trying to get contracted to work. So they couldn't contract me into my classroom role. But they said, hey, we have this workaround where we can contract you as a substitute in your own classroom until the, shortage is resolved or the contract, crisis is resolved, and then we can get you contracted into your position. So I went and got my credential to become a substitute teacher on top of having my teacher credential.
Hmm.
And this problem has persisted now for 20 years. So the technology hasn't improved that much to kind of help place substitute teachers. The technology hasn't really improved much specifically to support K-12 educators. And what we're constantly hearing from local districts as well as state departments of ed is like, we don't have our hands around this problem because we don't have the systems to support it. And, the technology that we have right now is so antiquated that it's not helping us either. So
can you give me a sense, I guess, I don't want to fall down the rabbit hole too far, but what is the technology that a district would use today, a typical district would use? I'm thinking spreadsheets, but you tell me, what is it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So, with our company, we're selling directly to state departments of education to help them kind of streamline their credentialing process. Because what we're seeing right now with states is that it's taking upwards of 14 to 16 weeks for somebody to get through the credentialing process. About 27 states nationally credential their substitute teachers as well as their full-time educators. So what we're seeing is, there's a massive shortage, but there's also a clog in the pipeline. And so if we can improve that point of entry, right, and make it more professionalized, more streamlined for folks, right, it gives them a better entry point to the classroom. But above and beyond that, right, when we're seeing data saying that, 46% of classrooms pre-COVID did not have coverage when a teacher was absent, that's a pretty big number. And we know those numbers have only increased since the pandemic started. So we only see this problem increasing. And I think that there's a lot of lower hanging fruit to kind of help the onboarding and pipeline process to get people into the classroom, and then technology that can support them when they're in the classroom and make their jobs a little bit easier. So some of the technology that exists today, to your previous question, there's absence management software, which we've seen for decades. Really the only evolution with absence management, and Michaela can speak to this, is, you get a text message now when there's a vacancy versus a phone call. And she can tell you more about her process of what she went through and the technology that she encountered when she was trying to become a sub.
All right, I'm throwing the mic over to you, Michaela. I'm glad that you teed it up that way, because what's the reality that you experienced about? Okay, I mean, you're at the professor level, you're at the higher ed level, and you're like, hey, wait, I can roll in and do sixth grade. I can be a sub. I can do this. Like, what was the hurdle you had to overcome, and then, actually getting into the classroom? What was that like?
So long story short, really the credentialing process was the biggest, most shocking hurdle. It was right around Christmas last year that I started reading about the possibility of public schools starting to close down again, not because of COVID this time, but because of teacher shortages. And I panicked and I said, no way, my kids have been home way too much in the last year and a half. We will not do this again. What can I do about it? I can, go on Facebook and complain, or ... Hey, why don't I become a sub? I have tons of paid time off coming to me through my job. What better way to use it than to go into the schools, right? I'm a grown up. I can fill in a room, right? I sought out possibilities for volunteering. That wasn't an option. So becoming a sub seemed to make the most sense. I went online, Googled it, thought it would be a quick, form, maybe some.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, look, I got 3 degrees. Can't I just like roll in? Can I just totally. Look, I'm not.
You both should be able to, right? Like, that's the crazy thing, is everybody needs folks like you in the classroom subbing in. It would make teachers feel a lot better too.
Figured it would be a couple weeks, right? Like, there must be some paperwork, fingerprints, whatever. Well, it ended up being about 5 months before I actually could step foot in a classroom. And I wrote about my adventures on the internet. I can share links. You guys can get, all the details there. I won't bore you with them today. But really seeing the behind the curtain of every step of that process, from a user experience perspective and just from a problem solving perspective, was really shocking to me. I knew then, and I know now through my children, that the schools need substitutes. My daughter, who's in 11th grade, as I said, says that in the morning, the principal comes on the announcements and rattles off a list of rooms that need grownups covering them. So, they still need people. And there are people like me out there who have time off from their jobs that they could use for this, or that are stay-at-home parents or others, right, who might be willing to step up. But there was no, advertisement that I clicked, yes, I'd like to do that. And even though I sought it out, I still couldn't get through the process in a timely fashion.
Wow, interesting. So Brooke, tell me, like,
Yeah.
this sounds like it potentially is a political problem. This is this sounds like a juggernaut at like the state school system level. How is technology going to be like? How does this present at least a first step in the solution, or how does how is technology going to help here?
Yeah, so I think if you look just at substitute teachers, we kind of see them as like the OG gig economy worker, right? And we know that there's a lot of great technology out there today that's supporting the gig economy, but yet we haven't transferred that technology into schools, right? Or into education. So borrowing kind of what we've learned a little bit from the gig economy and the lessons learned there, good and bad, right? There's a lot of folks who have popped up in this space where we can bring a number of partners together to streamline the credentialing process. So utilizing what we call verifiable credentials, and you'll see a lot of this discussed in kind of the Web3 space. It is not crypto. It doesn't have to be blockchain. But it's a great way for people to be able to evidence that they have the skills and the credentials to be a teacher, whether it's a substitute teacher or a full-time educator, and evidence those credentials a lot faster. One of our advisors and our lead investor for our crowd fund, Mike Bauer, talks a lot about it in terms of like TSA pre-check, right? So you go TSA pre-check, right? You get instantly through. We can do that same thing with educators. So very secure process. We don't want to lower the bar for who's going into classrooms. And our biggest concern with what we're seeing in terms of the political elements of this and the policy elements of this is that we keep lowering the bar to get more people to sign up to be substitutes. But in the reality, like Michaela experienced, folks, we don't necessarily need people with lesser skills. We just need to get people through this credentialing process so that they're not dropping out. We're hearing from retired teachers that they don't want to go and get a sub-credential because it's such a laborious process right now for them. So people who are ideally situated to be in the classroom as substitutes right now, like you, like Michaela, like retired teachers, are struggling to get into the classroom. So we want to make this a more frictionless process for them by using these verified credentials, getting them through the system a lot faster. And so with our platform, we can get that down to a number of days versus weeks or months.
Wow. And who are the people you have to convince in order to like push go on this? Let's just say at a public school system level. I mean, is this an act of God kind of thing, or is this a school by school could choose this? Do charter schools or other schools have have the ability to move faster? Like, enlighten me a little bit about what kind of hurdles you see there.
So I think a lot of times we look at government, whether it's state departments of education or local education agencies, and we think, oh, they're not really that innovative and they're really slow to move. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes, right? Sometimes their hands are also tied, right? Because there's a number of state regulations that they have to abide by, and they've got to check all those boxes and those types of things. And so what we're trying to do, like, with a lot of our verified credentials, like background checks, reference checks, all of those things that are really critical to have in place, especially when you're bringing adults in front of kids. We're using best-in-class partners to do that. And they're actually more comprehensive checks than what's currently conducted today. So we're trying to bring that technology, that modern technology, to actually make their lives a little bit easier. In terms of who we have to convince, it varies on a state by state basis, right? We know that some states are very bottom up, right? So if a couple of local districts that are big players in the state say, hey, we want this, and the state will adopt it, right? We know in some cases right now, and what we're seeing is with the huge influx of dollars that have come from the federal government with the COVID relief funds, those are one-time use kind of funds that have to be spent by state departments of education and districts. They're trying to figure out, like, what's that one-time use that we can spend this on and not create a hole in the budget going forward. And so we're advocating that technology modernization, right, with which would be like adopting Bench K-12, would be a great move for them because it actually saves them money in the long run. They're no longer having to pay for staffing agencies that are, producing mixed results, as Michaela can share with you and her experience there. Or they're not having to pay for all these individual software systems at the local level, that's driving up costs for schools as well. So basically a state Department of Ed would adopt our platform, and then every local agency within that state would get our platform as part of that contract. So if you're a small school or a small district that can't normally afford technology, it doesn't matter because you get the technology if your state adopts it with Bench K-12. And it also helps with reciprocity as well. So we're seeing a lot of issues with reciprocity across state lines. So if you're like Michaela and you live in Connecticut, in that tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and let's say you live on that state line and you say, hey, I'm really close to this district in Jersey, or I'm close to this district in New York, and I would love to be able to sub across state lines. We hope to enable that by every one of those states adopting Bench K-12 at the state level, so that folks have kind of seamless credentialing reciprocity across state lines, similarly to traveling nurses today.
It's a beautiful vision. Yeah, I really, and I'm glad. I don't want to miss that. You threw that in there at the end, but I think that's a really key point, right? The traveling. Yeah. I know the traveling nurse, let's call it sector, is it's bloomed, it's blossomed, and it's something that's actually created a lot of not only great opportunities for people that are registered nurses, but also when there is a need somewhere, we can fill those needs easier. That's been a big thing for quite a while. And it's really matured, and I can see that in the teaching sector as well. It's really kind of funny. Many people who've listened to this podcast for a while, and they know I've lived all over the world, but right now I live in Mexico City, and so just the attraction for teachers to an international school like my kids go to, it's another one of those things. They kind of flock to the place where better resources, better administration, better pay, those kinds of things as well. So I could see this, which kind of lends to a question. This is the eLearn podcast. We talk about ed tech all the time. It's always focused on how do you make the classroom experience better. It's focused on the student experience, and I guess the teacher experience as well. But as a deliverer of education, are you a part of other conversations where we're focusing on technology that's actually helping the teacher profession? I'm completely honest with you, and unless we're talking about sort of the HR, employee satisfaction type of thing that happens in the higher ed space, those types of pieces. This is the first conversation I've had around how do we provide less friction for the teacher. Like, open that conversation up for me a little bit. I don't even know what really to ask about that. Are you unique in this marketplace, or what other players are you partnering with and helping with, and those kinds of things?
Yeah, so I can definitely talk about the marketplace, but I would actually really love for Michaela to just talk about, as a starting point, like her experience going into a school for the first time. I mean, I think you were at your child's school, right? So you had some familiarity with it, but going in as a sub, what was your kind of experience when you kind of entered?
Yeah, and maybe I can finish by touching on what I think this innovation can do for teachers too. But yeah, so it's interesting because due to health concerns as well as safety concerns, schools are really not open to parents the way they were a generation ago. So I didn't know much about what was happening inside my kids' schools. Occasionally, since they were in kindergarten, I had gone in to chaperone a thing or do a visit, but really I didn't know much. And to be honest, the rumors flew about how terrible it was inside the public schools. And so part of me going in as a sub was not just like, I'm determined to help schools stay open, and on some days it's a matter of literally one extra grown-up keeps the school open, one fewer school has to close. So it wasn't just practical. It was also a window into this world that I care deeply about, but really didn't know much about firsthand. So after the insanity of the credentialing and the approval process, which that's a whole story unto itself. Day one came, I was able to walk in. I had no idea what I was going to have to do, how I was going to learn my way around. Again, I won't bore you with all the details. I did write about them on Medium, but it was totally illuminating to see the inside of a school, to feel the school culture, to recognize all the different humans that make the place buzz and hum. It's obviously not just the kids, not just the teachers, it's the coaches, the custodians, the social workers, the people who work in the office, and every one of them, it like felt to me like they were bringing their A game. They were there, but I could also see how, there weren't enough subs, let's say, to cover the empty classrooms. So people were being stretched way past their usual limits. And, we've all sort of gone about our lives saying like, teachers are heroes. My gosh, I can't believe how much they do, how much they accomplish. They're out, buying school supplies with their own money during their free time, right? We've all heard those tropes over and over again. We've known teachers who are living, breathing examples of this, but seeing it from a substitute perspective, which is not something we think about much, was just interesting to me because I could see what it means for them to not have enough bodies in the building, not have enough adults to cover the basic needs, how they then have to adapt. There were teachers who I would walk up to the classroom where I was assigned, and their classroom was the one next door, but they were watching to see if anybody was going to be showing up in the room where I was assigned. So, just from how this type of innovation can support teachers, which ultimately supports students and supports learning environments, didn't feel like a far-fetched notion to me. I could see it in action on day one.
So let me ask you about this. So how does this potentially, a technology like Bench K-12 or platform, I apologize. If I think about the teacher profession being affected by or enhanced through the gig economy, right? And for just let's put everything from Uber to DoorDash to as you were saying, what was the example you gave earlier?
Traveling nurses,
etc.
Yeah, care.com.
How does this how does this enhance, change, evolve what a substitute teacher is? Does this potentially, I'm thinking, a vision in the future. Does this make every teacher a substitute teacher? Do teachers potentially then, do you envision a time when it's like, hey, look, we kind of have like a mobile teaching universe that where every class could kind of be at any teacher at any time? Or like what's that grand vision? Maybe I'm asking too big a question there.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I think that there's a lot of value in, if we think about our own educational experiences, right? There are those teachers that you had and maybe your brother and sister had, or hopefully your parents didn't also have them, but I think in some cases that is the case, right? So I think that there's, the school as a social construct, right? Let's think about the school as it functions within a community, right? It's a hub. It's this thing that has some permanence for families. And I think especially when you think about communities that are struggling and lower income and things like that, the school plays that much more of a role. And I think the teachers having some stability in your teacher workforce there really matters to those communities and really matters to any community, frankly. So I think, yes, there could be some of that movement with educators when you're looking at folks who specialize in a certain content area that may not have enough people serving it, right? Where you may want to offer more classes and be able to have that a little bit more transience there, a little bit more movement there. But I love this idea that kind of Michaela talks about as like the substitute teaching role as an opportunity for community to re-engage in schools, and for parents to re-engage in schools. And so if we can make that process of getting somebody credentialed that much easier and faster, I mean, we're hearing from some potential corporate partners, they're like, oh, well, we have all of these volunteer programs that, all of these companies want this opportunity for their employees to go out and volunteer and have a meaningful volunteer experience. But to find a meaningful volunteer experience is really hard. It's really time consuming for nonprofit organizations, right? Imagine if those folks who have a corporate volunteer program through their company says, okay, I'm going to volunteer in my kid's school as a substitute. The school district is now not having to pay for that substitute's time because it's coming, grazie through the corporation. right? So it's helping on a budgetary level for schools, but it's also providing parents this opportunity to engage differently with their kids' education and with their school environment, right? So, Michaela really got that experience of firsthand, like, what is it to be a teacher? What is it to be a principal, right? On a day-to-day level, what is it to manage a classroom through an entire school day and have to, not get a bathroom break and all of those things that teachers experience, right? That are really challenging that we don't think about, right? Like, you're always on. So I think it's a great opportunity to get community re-engaged in our schools in a really positive way that's mutually beneficial. I also think it gives teachers, full-time educators, a break, right? Because they know that, like, if they can't come to school because they have a family commitment or they have a planned absence, that it's okay for them to take that time off and that their students aren't going to suffer because of it. And so one of the ways that we're really looking to improve the experience for educators, students, and substitutes is, like when Michaela would get like a job assignment, say through Bench, she would actually be able to communicate, if it's a planned absence, with that regular classroom teacher in advance of her coming. So they could talk about a lesson plan and a strategy. She could see all of that in advance. When she gets to the school, she would be able to take attendance in the application. So we know that school budgets are based, unfortunately, on seat time still. So attendance is a really critical thing for substitutes to be able to do that they can't always do easily because it's locked into a student information system that they don't have access to or device to access. So we're integrating with student information systems so subs can take attendance directly from our platform and it goes and feeds back into the school system. Things like, unfortunately, active shooter protocols that we have to think about now, right? Substitutes aren't going to necessarily have that on day one, but they can be able to access that through the app on the phone. They can see what those emergency protocols are within that school directly from our application. So things that allow them to feel more supported and have the information that they need so that they don't feel like an island when they arrive at the school. They know where to park, they know who to check in with, all of those simple things, right? That we kind of take for granted in our day-to-day lives. Substitute teachers don't always get that.
And you can even order an Uber that will take you to the school.
No, we could do that. I think we would probably partner with Lyft.
Sorry. No brand identification here. That was
but that's
poor attempt at humor.
But they have not provided any funding for this podcast.
So we're 25 minutes into this conversation, and it all sounds awesome, and that's no joke, right? It sounds fantastic. What have been the pushback that you've received? What have been, the challenges that you're experiencing? What are some of the difficult things that are coming across your desk right now that you're having to overcome as Bench K-12? Like what are your top 3 problems that you're trying to overcome?
So it's interesting. This is the first time. So I, started off my career as an educator. Then I worked in philanthropy and nonprofit for a number of years, raised a ton of money in that role. Then I moved into K-12 management consulting. So started my own consulting firm, blew that out, got really tired of only incrementally solving problems. And, when the pandemic hit, I had more time to really sit with this and was like, let's create an end-to-end solution. Like, I don't want to be the consultant that just drops in and parachutes for a day. I think the biggest challenge that I've seen is, one, raising money for this company, which I never thought, raising $1 million was like nothing when I was in philanthropy and nonprofit. I was like, oh yeah, we can do that. That's fine. I mean, our raise goal is $1 million. And I never thought I would be 2 years into this saying like, we haven't hit that raise goal. So there's a lot of skepticism in venture capital about funding any kind of government related technology ventures. They're very, very reticent and very fearful, frankly, of kind of the procurement process within government and within education. And it's funny because I'm like, well, you guys aren't fearful of it when it comes to like SpaceX and when it comes to like government.
A company around defense funding that I'm thinking it's pretty much a darling of Wall Street, isn't it?
Right. And I'm like, education as a sector is, a multi-billion, probably trillion at this point dollar industry. And like, if you're afraid of the procurement cycles, like, there's probably some other inappropriate comment that I can make about this, but like, I'm just like, where's the conviction, right? Like, and I feel like somewhere along the way, like tech stopped trying to solve big problems and it started solving these like niche, like not need to have things, but like nice to have things. Like, yeah, I can have 5 different companies now deliver Thai food down the street for me. Like, great. But it's like, I can't get a substitute in a school for a kid. And these are problems that we can solve, but we have to have conviction and the willingness to do it. And so I think that's been one of the bigger problems. I think the second problem, and I don't even say it's a problem because I've actually been pleasantly surprised at the number of state education agencies that have been excited about what we're building. I think the challenge that we have, but that we're dealing with very creatively is because we're a brand new entrant into the space, even though our team is very experienced and has sold to state departments of education or worked in state departments of ed before, because as a company, we haven't done that yet. There is an issue with procurement in terms of like, they want you to have a certain level of experience with state departments of ed. So the way that we're solving that is saying, hey, who's your number one contractor that you trust for implementations? And we're going to partner with them so that you guys feel like you have a credible partner that you've worked with before that you feel comfortable with, right? To actually handle the implementation for us so that there's a comfort level for the state. So I think that you run into these things and you're like, okay, let's just creatively solve that, right? So I wouldn't say it's as big of a problem as I anticipated it being because we're solving it creatively. But those are probably the two biggest ones. And then, gosh, is there a third? I don't know that there's a third. Let me get back to you on that one.
Well,
I would say like a global recession impacting tech markets and, all of that. So yeah, which,
Yeah,
game on.
At the same time, we also know that there's the largest transfer of wealth happening at least in the United States. I mean, globally, but right now, right, in terms of philanthropic organizations, foundations, monies of means, those kinds of things. It's a really interesting time to be in a space where you can raise your hand and say, I think I've got a great idea, or if you want to make an impact. So as someone who comes from the philanthropy space, I really think that there's a very interesting opportunity there as well. Yeah. I also find it fascinating too that as someone who's been in that space as well, that the chicken and egg problem is being presented to you. It's like we think this is great, we'd love to have it, but we need you to have experience in order to do that. Michaela, did you also find when you were trying to become a substitute teacher, where one of the credentialing questions is like, hey, can you show us your substituting experience in order to get credentialed?
No.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because that would be like that.
Like, do you have a pulse?
No, there were thousands of steps. If you break down all the questions and all the things I needed to do, none of them had anything to do with my experience as an educator or a community member or somebody who could manage a room, nothing. I don't think it necessarily needs to include that. I think that a lot of it, as Brooke alluded to earlier, really has to do with trusting the right grownups to be in these spaces and then giving them the right tools and instructions to be able to carry out the duties. So I'm fine with the fact that, I wasn't tested as to my teaching abilities. But I do think really this speaks to the possibility of how much value other people can be adding to the school communities. So, if you're an electrician and you want to take a week, a year to be in the public school district in your town, maybe it gives you more exposure to your own community. Maybe it's a fulfilling, satisfying experience. But imagine the kind of value that person could bring to the school community just with their knowledge and their connectedness and who they know. And, there's so much that really they could bring to the space. So I don't think, credentialing teachers necessarily has to do with their teaching ability, but their presence in the community has so much potential.
Fantastic. I want to bring it back, kind of circle, tie this all together. Take me to, okay, what are the next steps for Bench K-12? What are your greatest needs right now? How can people help? And then what could I do today if I'm in Springfield, Ohio, to help with this shortage, like to take a next step and those kinds of things? Brooke, what can we do for Bench K-12 to get this moving forward?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So you had also asked the question too that I didn't get to about marketplace, so I can kind of weave that into this response too. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things, one of the really great folks that we're working on a partnership with right now is Substantial Classrooms. They're a nonprofit. They focus solely on professional development for substitute teachers, right? So those things that Michaela talked about, around like, was I prepared to be a sub? No, probably not, right? But like, it didn't matter, right? doesn't matter. But if you're going to be successful long-term as a sub, like you need to have some classroom management skills, and those are going to look different than a full-time teacher, right? Because you don't have the same kind of relationships with the students. So, we're working with folks who have been in this space, working on this specific substitute teacher problem, right, for some time. But like we've talked about, right? Like our goal isn't just substitute teachers, right? We're not just going to be the company that supports technology for subs. We want to look at this for teacher credentialing, principal credentialing, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, right? Any certificated role in K-12, right, can be accomplished on Bench K-12, in our future state. One of the things that I think folks can do right now is, number one, period, sign up to be a substitute teacher wherever you are. Go through that process, figure out how to navigate it, see what Michaela saw, and then say to the folks that know, hey, we could be doing this differently and better and less painfully. And here's a company that's trying to work on this, and look into this technology, have a conversation with them. So I think that that's one thing. Our schools desperately need more substitute teachers right now, and more educators too. So if you're even thinking about a career change, consider teaching. So those, I think, are the two biggest things that I would say folks can do right now. And the other piece would just be, as I don't mean this in a trite way, but do something like, as we go back to school and close out the school year, do something, or this calendar year, not school year, but do something for the teachers that educate your kids. Give them a gift card someplace, even a nice note to say, hey, we really appreciate you. We know it's been a challenging couple of years and we see you, I think is super meaningful. And teachers can't hear that enough.
Michaela, anything you want to add there?
Oh, no, I'll just second what Brooke just said. Like I've been articulating, once I got inside the school and I saw the richness of the community, I just had this whole new perspective on it. So if maybe you're not in a position to start the sub credentialing process now, which I do think is an excellent experience trying to navigate, you can show up for games or recitals or, shows produced by the art shows. You can talk to not just your own kids about what they're experiencing in school, but the kids in the neighborhood, and continue to build that community, even if you can't set foot inside the school. But then keep on the lookout for ways to engage. Schools are public schools in particular are such an important part of the fabric of our societies. And somehow I feel like we've gotten away from that. And so anything you can do to get back to that is valuable, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Brooke, I want to offer you the opportunity as well. You mentioned, you're raising funds. I'm putting your link up here right now. I assume you're still collecting funds. Do I have that wrong? Or
so we are in a testing the waters phase right now. I have to say this for SEC reasons, so we don't get in trouble. But folks can go and make a commitment right now if they're interested in investing in Bench K-12. You can invest as low as $100, and you actually get equity in the company. And Mike Bauer, who is the head of ed tech strategy at AWS, is our lead investor for the round, and you can read more about it there. But we're going to be going public with the round after the first of the year, which means it's going to be open and live to take actual dollars, not just commitments. And we're trying to raise $250,000 right now through that crowdfund. So we would love your support, and we think it's a great investment. And instead of your favorite nonprofit, invest in us. or both.
Awesome. So Brooke Barrett, Michaela Kingsley, I can't thank you enough for putting this problem on the table. We often hear about the teacher shortage, but getting substitute teachers into classes and just navigating that system. This is me being completely honest. I had no idea that it was such a difficult thing to navigate. I'm very excited to hear about innovation in this space. As I said, we're always talking about the future of education here, and any way that we can continue to evolve that is always exciting to hear about. So I wish you both best of luck.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for everybody for listening.